For years, I watched in silence as my wife fell into another man's arms, a wealthy CEO who had everything I seemingly didn't. They thought I was broken, defeated, a husband too weak to fight back. What they didn't know was that while they were celebrating their perfect affair, I was orchestrating the greatest revenge story, one that would cost him not just his lover, but his entire empire. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. I still remember the exact moment my world started to crack. It was during one of those high society charity galas that Emily, my wife of 8 years, had become so fond of attending. The kind where wealthy entrepreneurs and corporate elites gathered to pretend they cared about causes while really just networking and showing off their success. Emily stood across the room, champagne glass in hand, laughing at something Alexander Morrison had just said. Morrison, the 45-year-old CEO of Morrison Technologies, one of the fastest-growing tech companies in the country. He had that perfectly tailored Tom Ford suit, that calculated smile, and a net worth that made headlines in business magazines. Watched as he placed his hand on the small of her back, just a little too familiar, just a little too comfortable. Emily didn't pull away. Instead, she leaned in closer, her emerald dress catching the light, the same dress I had surprised her with for our anniversary 3 months ago. "Tough sight to stomach, isn't it?" a voice beside me said. It was James, my old college friend, who had become a regular at these events. Morrison's got his eyes set on her. I took a slow sip of my whiskey, letting the burning sensation distract me from the scene unfolding across the room. "She's just networking," I replied, the lie tasting bitter on my tongue. "Emily's always been good at that." James gave me a look that was somewhere between pity and concern. "Look, Mark, I know things haven't been easy since you lost your position at the firm, but Emily, she's changed. Everyone's noticed." He wasn't wrong. The last year had been a carefully constructed narrative of my downfall. After supposedly losing my job at a prestigious consulting firm, I had become the subject of whispered conversations and pitying glances. "Poor Mark Stevens," they'd say, "can't even keep a job while his wife flourishes in her career as a marketing executive." What none of them knew, what even Emily didn't know, was that I hadn't lost anything. Every move had been calculated, every step precisely planned. The consulting firm's story was just that, a story. A cover for what I was really building. Emily's laughter echoed across the room again, and I watched as Morrison whispered something in her ear. She blushed, her hand resting on his arm just a moment too long. The wedding ring on her finger caught the light, a mocking reminder of vows that were becoming more meaningless with each passing day. "You know," James continued, his voice lower, "now Morrison's got a reputation. This isn't the first time he's taken an interest in a married woman. He likes the chase, the conquest, and once he sets his sights on something, I cut him off with a raised hand. Emily wouldn't do that." Another lie, but this one was necessary. Let them think I was naive, desperate to believe in a failing marriage. The next few weeks were a parade of late nights at the office, business, dinners, and emergency client meetings. Emily's excuses became more elaborate, more detailed, as if the complexity of her lies could mask their hollowness. She'd come home wearing new jewelry, gifts from her team for her exceptional performance. Her phone would light up at all hours, and she'd smile at the screen in a way she hadn't smiled at me in months. I played my part perfectly. The struggling husband, too defeated by his own failures to question his wife's sudden success. I'd ask about her day with just the right amount of resignation in my voice. I pretend not to notice when she'd slip away to take calls in the garden, Morrison's name flashing on her screen. During dinner parties, I became the subject of subtle jabs and not so subtle pity. "Mark's taking time to find himself," Emily would say, her tone dripping with false understanding. "It's been an adjustment, but we're managing." Her friends would nod sympathetically while their husbands avoided eye contact, as if unemployment was contagious. What they didn't see were the late nights I spent in my home office monitoring the movements of Morrison Technologies stocks, analyzing their acquisitions, finding the weak points in their corporate armor. They didn't know about the offshore accounts, the shell companies, the careful manipulation of market forces that was, slowly, invisibly, putting me in a position to strike. Emily's transformation continued. Designer clothes replaced her old wardrobe. Weekend spa retreats became regular occurrences. She was becoming someone new, someone who belonged in Morrison's world of luxury and power. And with each change, each lie, each betrayal, I documented everything. "I'm worried about you," my mother said during one of her visits. "You're just letting her walk all over you. The Emily I knew would never—" "People change, Mom," I interrupted, playing the role of the devoted husband. "She's supporting us while I figure things out. I'm grateful for that." The truth was, Emily's betrayal wasn't just about the affair. It was about the joy she took in my supposed downfall, the way she relished her new role as the successful wife, bearing the burden of a failing husband. Every pitying glance, every condescending comment, every subtle humiliation, she savored them all. But I had learned long ago that patience was the deadliest form of revenge. So I waited, I watched, and I built my trap piece by piece, because while Emily and Morrison were busy writing their love story, I was writing something else entirely, their downfall. Little did they know, their perfect affair was about to collide with a truth that would shatter their world, because sometimes the man you think you've defeated is the man who holds all the cards. And I was holding cards they didn't even know existed. The transformation of my marriage into a carefully choreographed performance of lies happened so gradually that to an outsider it might have seemed natural, like watching a flower wilt in slow motion, each petal of truth falling away to reveal something corrupt underneath. Emily's behavior became more brazen with each passing week. Our home, once filled with shared moments and genuine laughter, transformed into a stage where she would showcase her newfound superiority. Every dinner party became an opportunity to highlight the contrast between her rising star and my apparent descent into professional obscurity. "Mark's taking this time to really reflect," she'd say to our guests, her voice honey-sweet but laced with poison. "It's challenging, of course, but I believe everyone deserves a chance to find their path." She'd reach across the table, patting my hand with perfectly manicured fingers, a gesture that once meant comfort, now transformed into a public display of patronizing support. I watched as our friends, people we'd known for years, began to shift their behavior. The men who used to seek my advice on investments now directed their questions to Emily. The women who once genuinely enjoyed our couples gatherings now shot me pitying glances when they thought I wasn't looking. "You won't believe who I ran into at Le Cirque today," Emily announced one evening, her eyes glinting with barely concealed excitement. Alexander Morrison was having lunch with some investors. He insisted I join them. She paused, studying my reaction. "It's fascinating, Mark, the kind of business deals that happen over a simple lunch." I maintained my carefully crafted mask of indifference. "That's nice, dear. I'm glad you're networking." The words tasted like ash in my mouth, but I forced them out anyway. The frequency of these chance encounters with Morrison increased. Suddenly, he was everywhere. Charity auctions, gallery openings, exclusive restaurants. Emily's excuses became more elaborate, yet paradoxically less careful. She'd return home late, her perfume mixed with an unfamiliar cologne, her lipstick slightly smudged. "The board meeting ran late," she'd say, not meeting my eyes. "Alexander, Mr. Morrison, needed my input on some marketing strategies. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. She'd brushed past me, heading straight for the shower, leaving me alone with the lingering scent of her lies. The whispers at social gatherings grew louder. I'd catch fragments of conversations that would stop abruptly when I approached. "Morrison seems quite taken with her," they'd say. "Can you blame her? Look at what she's dealing with at home." The judgment in their voices was thick enough to cut with a knife. One particular evening stands out in my memory. We were at the annual Tech Industry Gala, an event Emily had insisted we attend despite my current situation. Morrison was there, of course, commanding attention in his bespoke suit and perfectly practiced charm. "Mark," he called out, approaching us with the confidence of a man who had never heard the word no. "Emily tells me you're between opportunities right now. Such a challenging market, isn't it?" His smile didn't reach his eyes. "You know, I might have something entry-level in our marketing department. Nothing too demanding, of course." Emily beamed at him, her hand resting on his arm. "That's so thoughtful of you, Alexander. Isn't it thoughtful, Mark?" The humiliation was deliberate, calculated. They wanted me to feel small, insignificant. What they didn't realize was that each slight, each condescending offer, each subtle mockery was being carefully catalogued, fuel for the fire that would eventually consume their perfect little world. During these moments, I thought about the meetings I had been having in secret, the careful manipulation of market forces that was slowly putting me in position to strike. Morrison Technologies had vulnerabilities. Overextended credit lines, aggressive expansion plans built on shaky foundations, board members who could be swayed with the right pressure. The irony was exquisite. While Emily spent her nights in Morrison's bed, I spent mine dismantling his empire piece by piece. Every share purchased through shell companies, every strategic alliance formed in the shadows, every weakness identified and exploited. It was all leading to a culmination that neither of them could see coming. "I'm concerned about you, man," James said during one of our private conversations. "You're just accepting all of this. The old Mark would have fought back." I gave him the same defeated smile I had perfected over months of practice. "What can I do, James? She's the one keeping us afloat right now." The truth was, I wasn't accepting anything. I was watching, waiting, building. Every time Emily came home late with another transparent excuse, every time Morrison looked at me with that smug superiority, every time our social circle treated me like a cautionary tale, they were all adding bricks to the wall that would eventually fall on them. The pattern continued, growing more obvious with each passing month. Emily started attending weekend business conferences that mysteriously coincided with Morrison's absences from the city. She bought new lingerie that I never saw, took calls in hushed tones on our back patio, and slowly moved her clothes into the guest bedroom under the pretense of not wanting to wake me when she returned late from work. What fascinated me most was how they thought they were being clever, subtle in their deception. They didn't realize that their every move was transparent, their every secret meeting documented, their every indiscretion noted and filed away for the moment when it would all come crashing down. Because while they were writing their love story, I was writing something else entirely, a tale of hubris, betrayal, and the kind of revenge that would be served at a temperature far colder than either of them could imagine. The pieces were falling into place, the trap was nearly set, and soon, very soon, they would learn the true cost of underestimating a man they thought they had defeated. What Emily and Morrison never suspected, what no one in our social circle could have imagined, was that my apparent professional downfall had been orchestrated entirely by my own design. While they were busy crafting their affair in luxury hotels and upscale restaurants, I was building something that would make Morrison Technologies look like a corner store operation. The truth was, I hadn't lost my job at the consulting firm. I had never really worked there at all. That was just a cover, a carefully constructed facade that allowed me to operate in the shadows. The reality was far more intricate. I was the silent owner of Vista Global Holdings, a consortium of companies that had been strategically acquiring technological patents, digital infrastructure, and most importantly, significant portions of Morrison Technologies' supply chain. My real office wasn't the small home study where Emily thought I spent my days job hunting. It was the entire 47th floor of a downtown high-rise, accessible through a private elevator where I orchestrated moves that would reshape the entire tech industry. The security guard Emily had once smirked at when visiting Morrison's building was actually on my payroll, documenting every time she entered and left the premises. Mr. Stevens, my actual assistant Sarah, handed me a thick folder one morning. The latest reports from our Asia-Pacific division. We've successfully acquired the semiconductor manufacturer Morrison's company depends on. I leafed through the documents, a slight smile playing on my lips. And they have no idea who's behind the acquisition? None, sir. Everything's been handled through our shell corporations. As far as they know, it's just market consolidation. The irony was delicious. Morrison's company was already unknowingly dependent on mine for critical components. Every time he boasted about his supply chain efficiency to Emily, he was actually praising a system I controlled. Every technological breakthrough his company announced relied on patents I owned. He was building his house of cards on a foundation that I could pull out at any moment. Their Q3 projections are optimistic, Sarah continued, pulling up more data on her tablet. Morrison's planning to announce a major expansion next month. He's leveraged significant company assets on this bet. Perfect timing, I murmured, studying the charts. How's our position? We control 43% of their supply chain through various subsidiaries. Their new AI initiative depends entirely on processing architecture we own through Singapore Tech Solutions. And, she paused, a slight smile crossing her face, we've just acquired their primary cloud service provider through our European division. I leaned back in my chair, looking out over the city skyline. Somewhere out there, Emily was probably having lunch with Morrison, both of them feeling invincible in their secret romance. Little did they know that their world was built on ground I owned. The complexity of my operation would have shocked them. While they thought I was wallowing in unemployment, I was running a global enterprise that made Morrison's company look like a small subsidiary. My network of businesses spanned 5 continents, employed over 50,000 people, and controlled key technologies that powered everything from smartphone processors to satellite communications. The board meeting at Harris & Chen went well, Sarah reported, referring to another company we secretly controlled. They've agreed to terminate their contract with Morrison Technologies next quarter. It'll look like a routine business decision. I nodded, remembering how Morrison had bragged about that particular partnership at a recent charity gala, his arm wrapped possessively around Emily's waist. Make sure the termination clause is ironclad. I don't want any room for negotiation. My phone buzzed, a text from Emily. Working late tonight, don't wait up. I knew she was meeting Morrison at his penthouse. The private investigator I had hired sent regular updates, complete with time-stamped photos and location data. Not that I needed them anymore. Their patterns had become embarrassingly predictable. Sir? Sarah interrupted my thoughts. There's something else. She pulled up another document on her tablet. Morrison's company is planning to acquire StartClear, the AI security firm. They think it's their ticket to becoming a major player in the cybersecurity sector. I couldn't help but laugh. StartClear had been mine for months, purchased through a series of offshore transactions that would have taken a team of forensic accountants years to unravel. Morrison was about to waste millions pursuing a company that I could make disappear. With a single phone call. Let them proceed with the initial offers, I instructed. It'll make the eventual revelation more interesting. The scale of my deception would have been almost comical if it weren't so meticulously planned. Every time Morrison boasted about his business acumen, he was actually celebrating decisions that played directly into my hands. Every time Emily gushed about his latest business victory, she was unknowingly praising my work. The timing needs to be perfect, I mused, studying the calendar on my desk. When is their next board meeting? 2 weeks from Thursday, Sarah replied promptly. They're planning to announce the Start Clear acquisition attempt then. Morrison's staking his reputation on this move. Perfect. I stood up, walking to the window. That's when we'll reveal everything. Make sure all our documentation is in order. I want every transaction, every shell company, every hidden acquisition ready to be exposed. The view from my office showed me the building where Morrison Technologies was headquartered. Emily was probably there now, in Morrison's corner office, thinking she was part of something powerful and unstoppable. The thought almost made me pity them, almost, because while they were playing their small game of secret rendezvous and stolen kisses, I was orchestrating a takeover that would send shockwaves through the entire industry. Their affair would soon be the least of their concerns, lost in the avalanche of revelations that would destroy not just Morrison's company, but his entire reputation in the business world. They thought they were writing a story of triumph, the successful CEO and his beautiful mistress, the pathetic husband left behind. What they didn't realize was that every chapter of their story had been authored by me, leading to an ending they never saw coming. It's fascinating how the smallest moments can trigger the biggest avalanches. For me, that moment came during the Morrison Technologies annual charity gala, an event that would become the catalyst for everything that followed. The venue was the kind of place that screamed old money. Crystal chandeliers, marble floors, and views of the city that made you feel like you were floating above the world. Emily had spent weeks preparing for it, buying a new dress that cost more than what she thought was our monthly mortgage. I knew Morrison had paid for it, just like he'd paid for the diamond bracelet that now adorned her wrist. "Try to smile a little," Emily whispered as we entered, her hand barely touching my arm. "Everyone important in the industry is here tonight." The contempt in her voice was barely concealed. She'd stopped trying to hide it months ago. Morrison spotted us immediately, making his way through the crowd like a shark cutting through water. "Emily," he beamed, completely ignoring my presence, "you look absolutely stunning." His eyes lingered on her in a way that would have made any real husband want to throw a punch. "Alexander," she breathed, her whole demeanor changing. "The event is magnificent. You've outdone yourself." The way she looked at him, it was like I'd become invisible. What happened next was a masterclass in public humiliation. Morrison, emboldened by months of successful deception, decided to turn me into the evening's entertainment. "Mark," he finally acknowledged me, his voice dripping with false sympathy. "I heard about your latest job rejection. Tough break, though I suppose Emily's success makes it easier to handle." He smirked, glancing at his colleagues who had gathered around. "Not every man can handle having such a capable wife." Emily laughed, actually laughed, along with the others. "Oh, Alexander, be nice. Mark's trying his best." She patted my arm like I was a child. "Besides, it gives him time to pursue his hobbies." The group around us chuckled. I recognized most of them. Board members, executives, people who thought they were untouchable in their positions of power. People who would soon learn just how wrong they were. "You know," Morrison continued, swirling his champagne, "I've always admired men who can accept their limitations. It takes a special kind of understanding to watch your wife flourish while you, well..." He left the sentence hanging, letting the implications sink in. I played my part perfectly, shifting uncomfortably, looking down at my shoes. Yes, well, Emily's success is everyone's success, right? My voice was carefully modulated to sound resigned, defeated. Oh, darling, Emily said, her tone sickeningly sweet. Why don't you get us some drinks? Alexander was just about to discuss the StartClear acquisition, and you know how these business conversations bore you. Morrison's eyes glinted with amusement. Yes, Mark, why don't you make yourself useful? Emily and I have some important matters to discuss. His hand found its way to the small of her back, a gesture that didn't go unnoticed by anyone present. As I walked away, their laughter followed me. I heard Morrison loud and clear, I don't know how you do it, Emily, living with such mediocrity. What they didn't see was my slight smile as I approached the bar. They had no idea that I had just closed the deal to acquire StartClear that morning through a series of shell companies so complex it would take their entire legal team years to unravel. I spent the next hour watching them from across the room. Emily and Morrison, growing bolder with each glass of champagne, his hand lingering on her hip, her fingers accidentally brushing his chest as she laughed at his jokes. The room was full of witnesses to their indiscretion, all of them too afraid. Of Morrison's power to say anything, quite a show they're putting on. James appeared beside me, his voice low. You can't keep letting this happen, Mark. There's only so much humiliation one man can take. I took a slow sip of my whiskey. Sometimes, I replied carefully. You have to let people think they've won before you can show them how completely they've lost. The evening reached its crescendo when Morrison took the stage to make his announcements. He stood there, confident and commanding, Emily beaming up at him from the front row. Morrison Technologies is entering a new era, he declared, his voice booming through the speakers. With our upcoming acquisition of StartClear, we will revolutionize the cybersecurity industry. Some people, his eyes found me in the crowd, might call it luck. I call it vision. The applause was thunderous. Emily looked around the room triumphantly, as if his success was somehow hers as well. The irony was exquisite. Later that night, as we drove home in silence, Emily finally spoke. You embarrassed me tonight, she said, her voice cold, standing there like some lost puppy while Alexander was trying to include you in the conversation. I kept my eyes on the road. I'm sorry you feel that way. She laughed, a harsh sound in the quiet car. That's your problem, Mark. You're always sorry. Sorry you lost your job. Sorry you can't provide. Sorry you're not half the man Alexander is. Is that what you think? I asked quietly. It's what everyone thinks, she snapped. God, do you have any idea how pathetic you look? How pathetic you make me look? If you had any pride, any dignity left, you'd just leave. I pulled into our driveway, turning off the engine. Is that what you want, Emily? For me to leave? She turned to face me, her expression a mixture of contempt and pity. What I want is to not be tied to a failure. Alexander has offered me everything you couldn't give me. Success, respect, a real life. I nodded slowly, letting her words hang in the air. You're right, I said finally. Things need to change. She misinterpreted my meaning, a satisfied smile crossing her face. Finally, you understand. I'll have my lawyer contact you about the divorce. What she didn't know, what none of them knew, was that this was the moment I had been waiting for. The moment when their arrogance would reach its peak, just before I brought their entire world crashing down. Because while they had been performing their little drama, I had been preparing for something far bigger. Tomorrow, Morrison would discover that his attempt to acquire StartClear had failed spectacularly. By next week, his supply chain would begin to crumble, and by the end of the month, he would learn the true meaning of failure. The game was about to change, and they had no idea they were already checkmated. The morning after the gala, I sat in my real office, watching the sunrise paint the city skyline in shades of gold. It was time to set everything in motion. The pieces were all in place. Now it was just a matter of timing the collapse perfectly. "Sarah," I called through the intercom. "Begin phase 1. My assistant entered with a stack of documents and her ever-present tablet. "All preparations are complete, sir. Our legal team has vetted everything 3 times. There's no way for Morrison to wiggle out of this." I spread the documents across my desk. Evidence of every secret meeting between Morrison and Emily, financial records showing his company's hidden vulnerabilities, proof of his attempted industrial espionage. But most importantly, the paperwork, showing my ownership of every crucial component of his business empire. "Start with the supply chain," I instructed. "I want it subtle at first, just enough to make him uncomfortable." Sarah nodded, her fingers flying across her tablet. "I've already instructed our semiconductor facility in Taiwan to delay their next shipment. Nothing dramatic, just quality control issues that need to be resolved. The beauty of the plan lay in its gradual execution. Morrison would start feeling the pressure, but he wouldn't understand why. Small disruptions at first, growing increasingly serious as the days passed. "What about StartClear?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "The acquisition announcement is scheduled for their board meeting next week. Morrison has already leaked the news to several industry insiders." Sarah allowed herself a small smile. "He has no idea the company's already ours." I leaned back in my chair, remembering Emily's words from last night. A failure, she'd called me. If she only knew that while she was sleeping with a millionaire, she was married to a man who could buy and sell him 10 times over. "Sir," Sarah interrupted my thoughts, "there's something else. Mrs. Stevens has just made a rather large withdrawal from your joint account." I checked the notification on my phone. Indeed, Emily had transferred a significant sum to a separate account. Preparing for her escape, no doubt. Little did she know that every account, every transaction, every financial move was being monitored. "Let her," I said. "It'll make for interesting evidence later." The next few hours were a carefully choreographed dance of business maneuvers. I made calls to key board members of Morrison Technologies, people who had no idea they were actually speaking to the man who controlled their fate. Each conversation was a subtle reminder of their vulnerabilities, their dependencies, their precarious positions. "The Harris and Chen contract termination is ready," Sarah reported. "It'll hit Morrison's desk tomorrow morning. The timing coincides perfectly with the delayed shipment from Taiwan." I nodded, pulling up the security feed from Morrison's office building on my computer. Emily had just arrived, wearing a dress I knew I hadn't bought her. She practically floated past security, heading for the executive elevator. The same security team that sent me detailed reports of every one of her visits. "What about the press?" I asked, turning away from the feed. "Everything's prepared. The moment you give the word, we have journalists ready to break the story. Full exposure, the affair, the corporate espionage attempts, the financial irregularities." Sarah paused. "It'll be nuclear." I stood up, walking to the window. From here, I could see Morrison's building, knowing that right now, he and Emily were probably celebrating what they thought was their impending victory. The StartClear acquisition would have been Morrison's crowning achievement, the deal that would have cemented his place among the tech industry elite. "Schedule a meeting with our banking partners," I instructed. "I want to be ready to call in Morrison's loans the moment everything goes public." "Already done, sir. They're actually quite eager to cooperate given the circumstances." Sarah's efficiency was, as always, impressive. "Oh, and the private investigators have delivered their final report. The evidence of the affair is comprehensive." I picked up one of the photos from my desk. Emily and Morrison at a private resort in the Maldives, a trip she had claimed was a marketing conference in Chicago. "Send copies to our lawyers. Make sure everything is properly documented." The rest of the day was spent fine-tuning the details of what would become the most spectacular corporate takedown in recent history. Every potential escape route Morrison might try to take had been blocked. Every ally he might turn to had been either bought out or warned off. "Sir," Sarah appeared at my door one last time that evening. "Mrs. Stevens just called your home phone. She left a message saying she'll be working late again. I checked my watch, 7:30 p.m., right on schedule." "Let me guess, Morrison booked their usual suite at the Four Seasons?" "Yes, sir. The security team has confirmed they arrived together 20 minutes ago." I allowed myself a moment of grim satisfaction. Let them have their evening. Let them bask in their perceived victory. Tomorrow, the first cracks would appear in their perfect world. "One more thing," I said as Sarah turned to leave. "Make sure our IT team is ready. The moment Morrison realizes what's happening with StartClear, he'll try to access their secure servers. I want him to find nothing but ghosts." As night fell over the city, I remained in my office watching the lights come on, in buildings across the skyline. Somewhere out there, my wife was in another man's arms, thinking she was part of some great romance. Morrison was probably whispering, promises in her ear, telling her how they'd be together once she left her failing husband. They had no idea they were characters in a play where I had written every line, planned every scene, and choreographed every move. Their affair wasn't just going to end. It was going to implode spectacularly, taking Morrison's entire empire with it. I picked up my phone, opening the message Emily had sent earlier. "Don't wait up. Important client meeting running late." For once her lie served my purposes perfectly, because while she was playing her part in this doomed romance, I was preparing to show them both what real power looked like. Tomorrow, the first domino would fall, and once it started, there would be no stopping the cascade of destruction that followed. I shut down my computer and gathered my things, preparing to head home to an empty house. But I wasn't going there to sleep. No, tonight would be spent making the final preparations for what was about to unfold. Because tomorrow, Morrison Technologies would begin its descent into chaos, and neither its CEO nor my wife would understand what hit them until it was far too late to stop it. The morning everything began to unravel started like any other. I arrived early at my hidden office, watching the sun rise over the city while Morrison Technologies was about to face its first major crisis in years. Emily had never come home last night, a fact that would soon become the least of her concerns. "Sir," Sarah strode in, tablet in hand, her expression barely containing her anticipation. "It's starting." I turned from the window, settling into my chair. "Show me." She pulled up multiple screens on the wall-mounted displays. The first showed Morrison's stock starting to dip as news of the Harris & Chen contract termination hit the morning business wires. The second displayed urgent emails from Morrison's supply chain managers reporting unexpected delays from their semiconductor suppliers. The third, and this one brought a slight smile to my face, showed Morrison himself arriving at his office far earlier than usual, his typically perfect appearance showing signs of stress. "How long until he realizes?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "The StartClear acquisition announcement is scheduled for their 9 a.m. board meeting. Their legal team should be discovering our ownership right about—" Sarah glanced at her watch. "Now." Right on cue, one of the screens showed Morrison's private elevator opening, his legal team rushing in with panicked expressions. I had imagined this moment countless times, but watching it unfold in real time was something else entirely. "Emily just arrived as well," Sarah noted, switching one of the feeds. My wife hurried into the building, wearing the same clothes from yesterday. "Should I activate the next phase?" I nodded, reaching for my phone. As expected, there were 3 missed calls from Emily, likely made the moment Morrison had shared the early morning crisis with her. I ignored them, focusing instead on the chaos unfolding on the screens before me. The next 2 hours were a symphony of destruction. Morrison's carefully constructed world began crumbling piece by piece, First, the Start-Clear acquisition fell apart publicly and spectacularly. The press release his team had prepared announcing the deal was replaced by headlines questioning Morrison Technologies' due diligence process. His board members are starting to panic, Sarah reported, scanning through internal communications our team had access to. The stock has dropped 12% in the first hour of trading. I watched as Morrison paced his office, making frantic calls to banks, lawyers, anyone who might help him understand what was happening. Emily sat in his private conference room, her own phone constantly to her ear, presumably trying to reach me. "Shall we proceed with the evidence release?" Sarah asked, her hand hovering over her tablet. "Not yet," I replied, standing up. "First, I want to pay them a visit." Sarah's eyebrows shot up. "You're going there yourself." "Sometimes," I smiled, adjusting my tie. "You need to see the look in their eyes when their world falls apart." I took my private elevator down to the garage where my driver waited with a Bentley, not the modest Honda I usually drove to maintain. My facade. The drive to Morrison Technologies headquarters took exactly 12 minutes. 12 minutes during which their stock dropped another 8%. The lobby was chaos when I arrived. Employees rushed back and forth, whispered conversations in every corner, worried glances at phones displaying stock tickers. Nobody paid attention to me as I walked to the executive elevator, the same one Emily had used countless times for her rendezvous. "I'm sorry, sir, this elevator is for—" the security guard started to say. I pulled out an access card, one that outranked even Morrison's. "I don't think that will be a problem." The guard's eyes widened as he scanned the card, probably wondering how someone he'd never seen before had that level of clearance. The ride-up was smooth and silent. I used those moments to center myself, to prepare for what was about to happen. When the doors opened, I stepped into the executive floor that had been the setting for so many of Emily's indiscretions. Morrison's assistant jumped up as I approached. "Sir, you can't just—" "He'll want to see me," I said calmly, walking past her toward the sounds of argument coming from the main conference room. I opened the door to find exactly the scene I had anticipated. Morrison stood at the head of the table, tie loosened, face red with anger as he berated his legal team. Emily sat to his right, her face pale, still in yesterday's clothes. The board members present looked like they were watching a ship sink. In real time. "Who the hell are you?" Morrison demanded as I walked in. "We're in the middle of a private—" "Hello, Emily," I said, ignoring him completely. My wife's face went from pale to ghostly. "Mark," she whispered, her voice trembling. "What are you doing here?" Morrison looked between us, confusion momentarily replacing anger. "You know this man," I smiled, taking a seat at the opposite end of the table. "Oh, she knows me quite well, don't you, darling? Though apparently not as well as she knows you." "Alexander." The room went deadly quiet. Morrison's legal team exchanged nervous glances. The board members shifted uncomfortably in their seats. "Security!" Morrison bellowed, reaching for his phone. "I wouldn't do that," I said calmly, pulling out my own phone. "You might want to check your company's latest stock price first." He glanced down at his screen, and I watched as what little color remained drained from his face. The stock had dropped another 15%. What is this?" he stammered. "What's happening?" "This," I said, leaning forward, "is what happens when you take things that don't belong to you." Emily stood up suddenly, her chair scraping against the floor. "Mark, whatever you've done—" "Sit down," I commanded, my voice carrying an authority that made her drop back into her chair instantly. "We're just getting to the good part." I nodded to Sarah, who had silently entered the room. She began distributing folders to everyone present. As they opened them, gasps and muttered curses filled the room. "What you're looking at," I announced to the stunned faces around the table, "is evidence of every meeting, every hotel rendezvous, every secret phone call between your CEO and my wife. along with documentation of some rather interesting financial decisions Mr. Morrison has been making with company resources. Morrison's face had turned an interesting shade of purple. You've been spying on me? Spying? I laughed. No, Alexander. I've been watching what's mine, and as of this morning, that includes your company. The conference room at Morrison Technologies had become a theater of shock and disbelief. I sat calmly at the end of the table, watching as board members frantically flipped through the documents Sarah had distributed. Each page revealed another layer of their CEO's indiscretions, both personal and professional. This is impossible, Morrison sputtered, his perfectly manicured facade crumbling by the second. You can't. You're nothing. You're unemployed. A nobody. I allowed myself a small smile. Am I? Sarah, please show them exactly who they're dealing with. My assistant nodded, activating the room's main display screen. What appeared made several board members audibly gasp. It was an organizational chart, showing the true ownership structure of not just Morrison Technologies' supply chain, but nearly every critical component of their business operations. As you can see, I explained, my voice steady and controlled, Vista Global Holdings, my company, owns 78% of your critical infrastructure. Your semiconductor suppliers, your cloud services, your data centers, even StartClear, the company you were so eager to acquire. Emily's face had gone from pale to ashen. That's not possible. You were unemployed. You lost everything. Did I turned to face her directly, or did I simply let you believe what you wanted to believe? Tell me, Emily, in all those nights you spent with Alexander, did you ever once question why it was so easy to fool your husband? Morrison slammed his fist on the table. This is some kind of trick, a bluff. I would have known if someone was buying up our supply chain. Sarah stepped forward, sliding another document across the table. Your latest quarterly report shows a net worth of approximately $300 million, Mr. Morrison. Mr. Stevens's current net worth through Vista Global Holdings and its subsidiaries is approximately $4.7 billion. The silence that followed was deafening. I watched as the reality of their situation slowly dawned on everyone in the room. The board members looked like they were about to be sick. Morrison's legal team was already reaching for their phones, presumably to update their resumes. You see, I continued, standing up and buttoning my suit jacket, while you were busy flaunting your wealth and sleeping with my wife, I was quietly building an empire that makes yours look like a corner store operation. Emily tried to speak, her voice barely a whisper. Why didn't you tell me? Why? I turned to her, letting her see the cold calculation in my eyes. Because I wanted to see who you really were, Emily, and you showed me. Every time you mocked me in front of your friends, every time you lied about working late, every time you spent my money while sleeping with him, you showed me exactly who you are. Morrison had started to sweat, his expensive shirt showing, dark patches under his arms. What do you want? Money? Name your price. I couldn't help but laugh. Money? You still don't understand, do you? This isn't about money. This is about consequences. Sarah stepped forward again, distributing another round of documents. These are the termination notices for every contract Morrison Technologies has with Vista Global Holdings and its subsidiaries. Effective immediately. You can't do this, Morrison shouted, jumping to his feet. It'll destroy the company. Yes, I said simply. It will. The board members were now in full panic mode. One of them, an elderly gentleman I recognized as their longest-serving director, spoke up. Mr. Stevens, surely we can come to some arrangement. The shareholders, I interrupted, should have paid more attention to who they were getting into bed with. Speaking of which, I pressed a button on my phone, and the display changed to show photos, dozens of them. Emily and Morrison in Various compromising positions, time-stamped and documented. The press receives these in exactly 1 hour, I announced, along with detailed documentation of how Morrison Technologies' CEO used company resources to fund his affair with a married woman. Emily shot up from her chair. You wouldn't. Mark, please, think about what this would do to me. What it would do to you. I turned to her slowly. Like what you did to me. How you humiliated me, mocked me, made me a laughingstock among our friends. Morrison's face had turned an interesting shade of grey. Listen, we can talk about this, make a deal. A deal? I smiled, but there was no warmth in it. Let me be clear about something. By this time tomorrow, Morrison Technologies will be worth less than the furniture in this room. Your reputation will be destroyed. Your career will be over. And you, I turned back to Emily, will finally understand what it feels like to lose everything. The room erupted into chaos. Board members shouted over each other, legal teams huddled in corners whispering frantically, and through it all, I stood calmly watching the destruction I'd orchestrated. Sarah, I said, turning to leave, make sure Mr. Morrison receives the divorce papers I had prepared. I believe his wife should know about his extracurricular activities as well. You bastard, Morrison growled, but the fear in his eyes betrayed his bravado. No, Alexander, I replied, straightening my tie. I'm just a man who watched and waited, a man who built an empire while you were busy stealing what wasn't yours to take. And now, I glanced at my watch, I believe you have about 55 minutes before your world officially ends. I walked to the door, then paused, turning back one last time. Oh, and Emily, don't bother coming home. Your key cards have been deactivated, and your accounts have been frozen. Consider it a parting gift. Now you know how it feels to have nothing. The last thing I saw as I left the room was Emily collapsing into her chair, tears streaming down her face, while Morrison stared out the window at his crumbling empire. The board members were already on their phones, presumably calling their brokers to dump their stock before the news hit. In the elevator ride down, Sarah showed me the latest stock updates. Morrison Technologies had lost 47% of its value since the morning began. By tomorrow it would be worthless. Should I release the press package now, sir? She asked as we reached the lobby. I nodded, stepping out into the morning sunlight. Let them burn. Behind me, Morrison Technologies headquarters stretched into the sky. A monument to arrogance about to become a cautionary tale. My phone buzzed with messages from Emily, desperate pleas I would never answer, because sometimes revenge isn't served cold. Sometimes it's served exactly the way they deserve it, with complete and utter destruction. The next 24 hours unfolded exactly as I had orchestrated, but watching it happen in real time was something else entirely. From my office across the city, I had a perfect view of the carnage as Morrison Technologies imploded spectacularly. The press release hit at exactly noon. Every major financial news network picked up the story simultaneously. A coordinated strike that left no room for spin or damage control. The headlines were devastating. Morrison Technologies, CEO in adultery scandal, company resources used to fund affair. Tech giant's supply chain collapsed. Vista Global Holdings terminates all contracts. Morrison Technologies stock in free fall. Board members jump ship. Sarah maintained a constant stream of updates, each one confirming another piece of the destruction. The stock has been halted after dropping 76% in the first hour of trading, she reported. Morrison's personal wealth has decreased by approximately $270 million since this morning. I watched the live feed from their building. Employees were leaving in droves, carrying boxes of personal belongings. The parking garage was a parade of luxury cars making their final exits. Everyone was trying to distance themselves from the sinking ship. Sir, Sarah appeared with a fresh report. Emily has tried to access all of your joint accounts. The banks have followed your instructions. Everything is frozen. I nodded, remembering the look on Emily's face when she realized just how complete her fall would be. What about Morrison? He's barricaded himself in his office. His wife arrived about 20 minutes ago. Apparently, she didn't appreciate learning about his affair from the news. Sarah allowed herself a small smile. The security cameras caught quite a scene in the lobby. My phone had been buzzing, non-stop. Calls from Emily, from our friends, from people who had mocked me at all those social gatherings. I let them go to voicemail, each desperate message a testament to how quickly loyalty shifts when power changes hands. The board has called an emergency meeting, Sarah continued. They're voting to remove Morrison as CEO, but it's largely symbolic at this point. The company won't survive the week. I stood by the window, sipping a glass of the same whiskey Morrison used to brag about collecting. Any word from their legal team? They've realized it's hopeless. Every contract, every acquisition, every deal was completely legal. You didn't just beat them, sir. You did it by their own rules. The afternoon brought a parade of revelations. More photos emerged, more details about Morrison's misuse of company funds. Emily's name was dragged through the society pages, her carefully cultivated image of the successful marketing executive, shattered by screenshots of text messages and hotel receipts. Your private investigator sent his final report, Sarah said, placing another folder on my desk. Apparently, Morrison promised Emily a position as vice president of marketing once. She left you. He was going to announce it after the Start Clear acquisition. I couldn't help but laugh at the irony, and now neither of them has a company to work for. The real entertainment came from watching their social circle implode. The same people who had attended their secret dinners, who had watched their affair unfold while patting my back in fake sympathy, were now scrambling to salvage their own reputations. Everyone was denying everything, trying to distance themselves from the scandal. James called again, Sarah mentioned. He says he always knew something was wrong, that he tried to warn you. Of course he did, I replied, remembering all the times James had sat quietly while others mocked me. They're all trying to rewrite history now. By evening, Morrison Technologies' headquarters was practically empty. The security feeds showed darkened offices and empty corridors. Only 2 lights remained on, Morrison's office, where he sat slumped at his desk, and the conference room, where Emily had been sitting alone for hours, staring at her useless phone. "Should we turn off their access to the building?" Sarah asked. I shook my head. Let them stay. Let them sit in the ruins of what they thought they had built. My own office was a stark contrast to their despair. While their world burned, I was finalizing deals to acquire what remained of Morrison's valuable assets at pennies on the dollar. The empire he had spent decades building would be absorbed into mine within days. The press is asking for interviews, Sarah noted. Everyone wants to know about the mysterious billionaire who brought down Morrison Technologies. Let them wonder, I replied. Mystery has its own power. As night fell over the city, I received one final update that brought everything full circle. Morrison's wife had filed for divorce, demanding not just his remaining assets, but also naming Emily in the lawsuit. The society columns that had once celebrated Emily's rise were now gleefully documenting her fall. "Sir," Sarah said softly, "Emily left this for you." She placed an envelope on my desk, Emily's wedding ring and a handwritten note. I didn't need to read it. Whatever justifications or apologies she had written wouldn't change anything. I dropped both the ring and the unopened note into my desk drawer, where they would stay as a reminder of why you should never underestimate the person you're betraying. "Have the locks changed at the house," I instructed Sarah, "and send someone to pack up Emily's things. She can have her clothes and personal items delivered to whatever hotel she's staying at." The night grew later, but I remained in my office, watching the city lights and reflecting on how completely their world had collapsed. Morrison had lost his company, his reputation, his marriage, and his fortune. Emily had lost her lover, her status, her financial security, and any chance at the life she thought she deserved. And me, I had lost nothing, because you can't lose what you've carefully planned to risk. Every move, every decision, every moment of perceived weakness had been calculated for this exact outcome. They thought they were writing a story of triumph, the successful CEO and his ambitious mistress. Instead, they had become cautionary tales about the danger of underestimating the man you're trying to destroy. The final stock report showed Morrison Technology's value had dropped by 89% in a single day, the largest single-day decline in the company's history. Tomorrow would bring more revelations, more consequences, more destruction. But for tonight, I sat in my office, enjoying the whiskey Morrison could no longer afford, watching the lights go out one by one in the building that would soon be mine. The morning after Morrison Technology's collapse, I arrived at my office earlier than usual. The city was buzzing with the aftermath of yesterday's events, but I had one more scene to play out. The personal confrontation I knew was coming. "Sir," Sarah met me at the elevator, tablet already in hand. "Emily's been in the lobby since 6 a.m. Security says she's refusing to leave until she speaks with you." I settled into my chair, adjusting my cufflinks, the ones Emily had given me on our first anniversary, back when she still pretended to love me. Let her wait another hour. The news coverage was relentless. Every channel showed Morrison Technology's headquarters, now practically a ghost town. The stock had been suspended from trading after falling another 30% in pre-market activity. Morrison himself hadn't been seen since yesterday, though his now estranged wife's lawyers were very visible, promising devastating revelations about his other indiscretions. "The remaining board members are trying to organize a sale of company assets," Sarah reported. "They don't realize we already control everything of value." I nodded, pulling up the security feed from the lobby. Emily sat there, still wearing yesterday's clothes, her perfectly maintained appearance now showing clear signs of distress. Gone was the confident woman who had looked down on me at cocktail parties. In her place sat someone who had finally learned what it meant to have nothing. "Send her up," I said finally. "Let's end this." Minutes later, my office door opened. Emily stepped in, hesitating when she saw me sitting behind the massive desk, the city skyline framing me through floor-to-ceiling windows. The contrast between this and the home office, where she thought I spent my days job hunting, couldn't have been more stark. "Mark," she started, her voice trembling, "please, we need to talk." "About what, Emily? About how you betrayed me? About how you enjoyed watching me appear weak? Or about how it feels to lose everything overnight?" She took a step forward, tears welling in her eyes. "I know I made a mistake, a terrible mistake, but what you've done, it's destroyed everything." "No, Emily, you destroyed everything. I just made sure you faced the consequences." She sank into one of the chairs facing my desk, her designer purse, a gift from Morrison, clutched tightly in her hands. How long have you been this?" She gestured at the office, the obvious wealth surrounding us. "Since before I met you," I replied calmly. "Every moment of our marriage, while you were looking down on me, mocking me, betraying me, I was building an empire that made Morrison look like a small-time player." "But why?" she whispered. "Why let me believe you were struggling? Why let me humiliate me, cheat on me? Because I wanted to see who you really were, Emily, and you showed me. Every time you laughed at Morrison's jokes about my failures, every time you spent my money while sleeping with him, every time you played the role of the strong wife supporting her useless husband, you showed me exactly who you are." She broke down then, tears streaming down her face. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Please, Mark, I'll do anything. I've lost everything. Not quite everything, I said, opening my desk drawer. I pulled out a folder and slid it across the desk. Divorce papers, sign them. Her hands shook as she opened the folder. There's no settlement. Did you expect one? You get nothing. Emily, the house, the cars, the accounts, everything is in my name or my company's name. You never owned any of it. But where am I supposed to go? What am I supposed to do? I leaned back in my chair, studying her. That's not my concern anymore, though I doubt Morrison will be much help. He's got his own problems now. He won't even take my calls, she admitted, her voice small. No one will. All our friends. They weren't friends, Emily. They were audience members in the little drama you and Morrison were performing, and now the show's over. Sarah entered silently, placing a pen on the desk. Emily stared at it for a long moment before picking it up. Her signature was shaky, nothing like her usual confident scrawl. Is there anything left? She asked quietly. Anything at all? Your personal belongings will be delivered to whatever address you provide, Sarah. Beyond that, I shook my head. You chose this ending, Emily. Every lie, every betrayal, every moment you spent looking down on me, they were all choices you made. She stood up slowly, her legs unsteady. I really loved you once, you know. Before you decided I wasn't enough. Before Morrison showed you a world of wealth and power, I smiled coldly. The irony is, I could have given you all of that and more. But you were too busy being ashamed of me to see what was right in front of you. What happens now? She asked, moving toward the door. Now, you leave. You start over. And every time you see a headline about Morrison Technologies' collapse, every time you try to access an account that's been frozen, every time you remember how far you've fallen, you'll think about the man you thought was beneath you. She paused at the door, turning back one last time. Will I ever see you again? No, I said simply. This is the last time we'll ever speak. Goodbye, Emily. After she left, Sarah returned with a fresh report. Morrison's wife's lawyers have added Emily to their lawsuit. They're claiming emotional distress and seeking punitive damages. I nodded, turning to look out over the city. Somewhere out there, Morrison was watching his world crumble, just as Emily was about to discover how quickly society forgets those who fall from grace. Any regrets? Sarah asked quietly. I thought about the years of watching Emily's betrayal unfold, the calculated patience it took to let them think they were winning. No, I replied. Sometimes the best revenge isn't just about winning, it's about letting them lose everything on their own terms. The sun was high over the city now, reflecting off the buildings that made up my true empire. In one of those buildings, Emily was probably realizing that her entire life had been built on an illusion, the illusion that she had married beneath her, that she was better than me, that her affair with Morrison was some kind of triumph. But illusions shatter, and when they do, reality hits harder than any punishment you could devise. Emily and Morrison had written their own ending. I just made sure they couldn't escape it. A week after Emily signed the divorce papers, I sat in my office reviewing the complete dismantling of Morrison Technologies. The business empire Alexander Morrison had spent decades building had been reduced to nothing in a matter of days. Final asset acquisition report, sir. Sarah placed another folder on my desk. We've secured everything of value at roughly 12% of their previous market worth. The technology patents alone are worth more than what we paid for the entire portfolio. I flipped through the documents, noting how thoroughly Morrison's world had been dismantled. And Morrison himself, living at his lake house, the only property his wife's lawyers haven't seized yet. The prenup he thought would protect him didn't account for corporate misconduct or misuse of company resources for personal affairs. Sarah allowed herself a small smile. His personal accounts are frozen pending investigation. The news coverage had been relentless. Every day brought new revelations about Morrison's misdeeds. each one carefully leaked from the treasure trove of evidence I had accumulated. His reputation, once sterling in the business world, was now synonymous with failure and scandal. Emily's been trying to contact some of our subsidiary companies for employment, Sarah mentioned, checking her tablet. Every application has been quietly declined. I nodded, unsurprised. And our former social circle? Most interesting development of the week, sir. The charity gala committee, the same one where Morrison and Emily used to parade their affair, has been reaching out. They'd like you to be the keynote speaker at their next event. The irony wasn't lost on me. The same people who had once smiled politely while watching Emily and Morrison mock me now wanted to curry favor with the man who had revealed himself as one of the most powerful figures in the industry. Decline politely, I instructed. I have no interest in playing their social games anymore. My phone buzzed. Another desperate message from Emily. She had been reduced to staying at a budget hotel. Her credit cards declined. Her former friends' doors closed to her. The society columns that had once documented her rise now gleefully reported her fall. Morrison's wife gave an interview this morning, Sarah reported, pulling up the video. She's positioning herself as another victim of his deceptions, claiming she had no idea about the corporate misconduct or the affair. I watched the interview with mild interest. Morrison's wife had played her cards well, distancing herself from the scandal while ensuring she would walk away with whatever assets remained. Emily, on the other hand, had become a pariah, the ambitious other woman who had helped bring down a corporate titan. "There's something else," Sarah said, her tone suggesting she had saved the most interesting news for last. "James has been making noise about writing a tell-all book. Claims he knew about Morrison's corrupt practices all along." I couldn't help but laugh. James, who had sat quietly through every humiliation, who had watched Morrison and Emily's affair unfold without saying a word, now wanted to pretend he had been some kind of silent witness to corruption. "Let him write it," I said. "It won't matter now." The afternoon brought reports of Morrison Technologies' remaining employees being let go. The once proud headquarters was being prepared for sale. Another asset to be absorbed into my empire. The security feeds showed people leaving with boxes, some crying, others angry, all of them victims of their CEO's hubris. "Sir," Sarah interrupted, "my thoughts. Morrison's lawyer called. He's requesting a meeting." "To discuss what?" "A potential settlement. Morrison is offering to publicly apologize, to admit to everything, in exchange for some kind of financial lifeline." I considered it for a moment, remembering all the times Morrison had looked down at me with that smug smile, all the times he had thought himself untouchable. "Tell him no," I decided. "Some debts can't be paid with apologies." As evening approached, I received one final update that brought everything full circle. The business magazine that had once featured Morrison on its cover, celebrating him as a visionary leader, was now running a special issue on his downfall. The cover photo showed him leaving his lawyer's office, looking defeated, with Emily in the background, both of them shadows of their former selves. "Your new profile piece is also ready for publication," Sarah mentioned. "They're calling you the silent giant, the billionaire who built an empire while letting his rivals underestimate him." I closed the magazine, turning to look out at the city lights coming on as dusk settled. Somewhere out there, Emily was probably in her hotel room, watching her world shrink to nothing. Morrison was likely at his lake house, watching his life's work crumble to dust. And me? I had emerged from the shadows, but not to celebrate their destruction. Success wasn't about revenge. It was about justice, about showing them that every choice has consequences, every betrayal carries a price. "Sarah," I called as she turned to leave, "send a message to the board of Vista Global Holdings. It's time we moved forward with our expansion plans, because while Morrison and Emily's story was ending, mine was just beginning. They had written their own downfall in the chapters of their betrayal. Now it was time to write something new, something bigger than revenge, more lasting than retribution. The city stretched out before me, a landscape of opportunities and possibilities. In the end, the greatest revenge wasn't just watching them fall, it was showing them how high I could rise. Once I stepped out of the shadows they thought they had trapped me in. 6 months had passed since the day Morrison Technologies crumbled. The city skyline had changed. The building that once housed Morrison's empire now bore my company's name, a silent testament to how completely the tables had turned. I stood in my office, much like I had that first morning when everything began to unravel, but now I was looking at a different world. The business papers had moved on to new scandals. The society pages had found fresh drama to report, and the story of Morrison's downfall had become a cautionary tale taught in business schools. "The final reports are in," Sarah said, entering with her ever-present tablet. "Morrison Technologies has been completely absorbed into Vista Global Holdings. The transition is complete." I nodded, picking up the morning's paper. Morrison's name appeared in a small article on page 6. He had been forced to sell his lake house, the last piece of his former life. His wife had taken everything else in the divorce settlement. "Any word on Emily?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "She's left the city," Sarah reported, "last seen heading to her sister's place in Phoenix. Apparently she's working as a junior marketing coordinator at a local firm." She paused. "It's quite a fall from executive status." The irony wasn't lost on me. Emily, who had once looked down on me for my supposed lack of ambition, was now starting. Over at the bottom, the woman who had enjoyed playing the role of the successful wife, burdened by her failing husband, was now the cautionary tale at social gatherings. "Morrison made one last attempt to reach out," Sarah continued. "His lawyer sent a proposal. He's offering to reveal more corporate secrets in exchange for a consulting position." I laughed softly. "Send the usual response. We have no interest in his secrets or his services." The truth was, watching their downfall hadn't brought me the satisfaction many might have expected. There was no joy in their destruction, no thrill in their humiliation. What I felt instead was a quiet understanding of how easily people can deceive themselves. "Sir," Sarah hesitated, "the press still wants to know why you did it this way. Why? Let them think you were powerless for so long? Why not just reveal yourself from the start?" I walked to the window, looking out at the city I had always controlled from the shadows. "Because sometimes the greatest lesson isn't in the fall. It's in understanding why you fell." Morrison and Emily had written their own ending long before I revealed my hand. Every mockery, every betrayal, every moment they spent believing themselves superior, those were their choices. I had simply ensured they faced the consequences. "The charity circuit keeps calling," Sarah mentioned. "They're very eager to have you join their boards now." "Of course they are," I replied. "Amazing how quickly perspectives change when power shifts." The social circle that had once watched Emily and Morrison's affair with amused tolerance now claimed they had always seen through their deception. The same people who had smiled politely at their public displays of affection now swore they had known it would end badly. "James finally published his book," Sarah said, placing a copy on my desk. "Inside the Fall, The Truth About Morrison Technologies. It's selling quite well." I picked up the book, noting how James had rewritten history to cast himself as the concerned friend who had tried to warn everyone. Another example of how people reshape the past to suit their present needs. "Your new profile in Forbes is ready for review," Sarah added. "They're fascinated by how you built your empire in secret. They're calling it the ultimate corporate stealth." strategy. But they were missing the point. This had never been about strategy or stealth or even revenge. It had been about truth, the truth of who people really are when they think they're winning, when they believe they have all the power. The board is asking about succession planning, Sarah mentioned. They want to know if you'll be taking a more public role now. I turned from the window, considering the question. Tell them nothing changes. We built this empire in the shadows. For a reason, let others chase the spotlight, because that was the real lesson in all of this. Power isn't in how the world sees you, it's in how you see yourself. Morrison and Emily had been so focused on appearances, on how the world perceived them, that they had lost sight of what was real. One last thing, Sarah said, preparing to leave. Emily's sister called. She's asking if you would consider helping Emily get back on her feet. I shook my head. Some lessons need to be learned the hard way. Emily chose her path. Now she needs to walk it. As night fell over the city, I remained in my office, thinking about how completely life had changed, not just for Morrison and Emily, but for everyone who had been part of their world. The social climbers, the fair-weather friends, the people who had laughed at their jokes and ignored their betrayals, all of them had learned something about the true nature of power. Because real power isn't in what you show the world, it's in what you know about yourself. Morrison had needed everyone to see his success. Emily had needed everyone to admire her rise, and in their desperate chase for validation, they had lost everything that actually mattered. I picked up my phone, looking at Emily's last message from months ago. I understand now. I'm sorry for everything, but she didn't understand. Not really. She was sorry for losing, sorry for betting on the wrong man, sorry for ending up with nothing. She wasn't sorry for who she had been. She was sorry for who she had become. And that was the final truth of it all. In the end, this hadn't been about revenge or justice or even power. It'd been about authenticity, about being true to who you are, even when the world thinks they know better. I shut down my computer and prepared to leave for the day. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities, new chances to build something meaningful. But I would face them the same way I always had, not concerned with how the world saw me, but focused on who I knew myself to be, because sometimes the greatest victory isn't in watching others fall, it's in remaining true to yourself, while they lose their way trying to be something they're not. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.